Think you know everything about Ghostbusters' most iconic weapon? From props that were never properly tested before filming to a legendary pack lost forever in Romania, the Proton Packs hiding secrets that would blow your mind at the speed of light. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Proton Packs. Fact 1. Never actually tested before first use. One of the most memorable moments in Ghostbusters happens in the elevator at the Sedgwick Hotel, when Ray Stantz suddenly realizes they've never actually managed to test their equipment successfully, and Egon Spengler admits it's his fault for not getting it done properly. What makes this scene even more interesting is that it wasn't just clever screenwriting. The prop department was dealing with the exact same problem behind the scenes when they built the actual Proton Packs for the movie. Stephen Dane, the hardware consultant who designed the packs, had an incredibly tight deadline to work with when he started creating these iconic props in 1983. He drew up his initial sketches based on flamethrowers from military magazines, bought a surplus pack frame from a store called California Surplus in Hollywood, and built a rough mock-up to show director Ivan Reitman. Once Reitman approved the basic design, Dane handed everything over to the prop builders, but there simply wasn't enough time to properly test how the packs would work during actual filming conditions. The prop team had to build several hero packs and multiple backup versions in just a few weeks, and they were so focused on making them look right and getting the electronics to function that real-world testing got pushed aside. So when the actors first strapped on these 40-pound contraptions at the Sedgwick Hotel set, they were genuinely discovering how awkward and heavy the packs would be to work with, just like their characters were figuring out how to use untested ghost-catching equipment. The nervous energy you see on screen during that first bust wasn't entirely acting. It was partly the cast dealing with props they'd barely had a chance to practice with before the cameras started rolling. Fact 2. Weighed as much as small refrigerators. Bill Murray once described the original Proton Packs as being like small refrigerators strapped to the actors' backs. And he wasn't exaggerating by much when you consider the actual weight of these props. The fully loaded hero packs that were used for close-up shots weighed around 40 pounds each, which meant the cast members had to wear what essentially amounted to a heavy piece of furniture on their backs throughout incredibly long filming days that often stretched to 14 hours or more. Harold Ramis later explained in interviews that the packs came in different versions depending on what the scene required, and the weight varied quite a bit between them. When they needed the proton streams to fire and all the lights to work properly, the packs had to be loaded with heavy battery packs and all the electronic components, bringing them to that 40-pound mark that Murray complained about. For scenes where the actors weren't actually firing the weapons, they could use lighter versions that had the batteries removed, which brought the weight down to around 20 pounds. But even those lighter models were still a significant burden to carry around all day. The physical toll of wearing these props became such a problem that when the cast reunited for Ghostbusters Afterlife decades later, Murray made it a point to comment on how much lighter the new packs were compared to the originals. He even jokingly confronted director Ivan Reitman on set, holding up one of the modern lightweight packs and asking why they didn't have Proton Packs that light back in 1984. The complaints from the actors about the weight were taken seriously enough that when Ghostbusters 2 went into production, the prop department specifically created new mid-grade versions that weighed only around 28 pounds to make filming more manageable. Fact 3. Built from military surplus backpack frames. The Proton Packs that became one of the most recognizable props in movie history were actually built on top of genuine military surplus backpack frames that were originally designed to help soldiers carry heavy equipment during the Vietnam War era. These frames were called Alice frames, which stands for All-Purpose Lightweight Individual Carrying Equipment, and they were the standard issue gear that the United States military used throughout the 1970s and 80s to help distribute weight evenly across a soldier's back and shoulders. When Stephen Dane was working on the initial Proton Pack design, he needed a strong foundation that could support all the heavy components like the fiberglass shell, aluminum backplates that they called motherboards, and all the electronic equipment that would make the lights work. He went to a military surplus store called California Surplus on Santa Monica and Vine in Hollywood and bought one of these Alice Pack frames to use as the base for his first mock-up. And this same military hardware ended up being used for all the hero packs in the actual film. The reason these frames worked so well is that they were specifically engineered by the military to handle heavy loads without breaking down, and they had adjustable straps with padding that could be customized to fit different body types. The frames featured aluminum construction with a kidney pad at the lower back to help distribute weight, which was essential when you consider that the prop builders were going to be bolting fiberglass shells and heavy electronic components onto them. Today, fans who build replica Proton Packs still seek out authentic Alice frames from the same era, though finding the original style frames has become increasingly difficult since they're no longer in production. Fact 4. Designed based on Flamethrower. Magazines. The iconic look of the Proton Pack came from a surprisingly straightforward source of inspiration, as hardware consultant Stephen Dane based his initial design sketches on pictures of military flamethrowers that he remembered seeing in various military magazines. When director Ivan Reitman brought Dane onto the project and explained what he wanted for the ghost-catching equipment, Dane went home and started drawing up rough concepts that borrowed heavily from the backpack flamethrower designs he'd seen in those publications, thinking that the visual connection between a flame-throwing weapon and a proton-throwing weapon made perfect sense for what the movie needed. Dane later described his design process in interviews, explaining that he had an early conversation with Reitman where the director told him exactly what he wanted the equipment to do and look like. And then Dane went home to sketch out ideas based on those discussions and what he remembered from the military magazines. The flamethrower connection was particularly useful because those weapons already had a similar setup to what the script called for, with a backpack component that held the fuel and a handheld nozzle for directing the stream, which matched perfectly with the concept of a backpack-mounted particle accelerator connected to a handheld particle thrower. Once Dane had his basic flamethrower-inspired sketches worked out, he headed to California Surplus, a military surplus store located on Santa Monica and Vine in Hollywood, where he purchased an actual pack frame to build his first physical mock-up of the design. He built this rough prototype based on what he and Reitman had discussed, then brought it back to show the director, and after they talked through some refinements and adjustments to the design, Dane handed the approved mock-up over to the prop builders who would create the final versions that ended up on screen. Fact 5. Originally featured dual wrist-mounted wands. The Proton Packs we see in the finished movie look completely different from what Dan Aykroyd originally envisioned when he first wrote the script, because his initial concept had each Ghostbuster wearing two wand-like devices that were strapped to their wrists, with one device on each arm that would extend out along their palms and reach about 6 inches beyond their fingertips. According to the production book Making Ghostbusters, these wrist-mounted wands would have been attached to the backpack through thick black flex cords, and the Ghostbusters would fire them using an elbow toggle switch located on the backpack itself, which would send out phosphorescent beams of red and green light from both arms. The reason this dual wrist wand design got scrapped had nothing to do with how it looked or whether it would work for the story, but rather came down to pure practical concerns about the visual effects deadline and budget. The team at Boss Film Studios, who were responsible for creating all the proton stream effects, were already working against an incredibly tight schedule to finish the movie, and they were looking for any way they could to save time wherever possible. Visual effects director John Bruno realized that if each Ghostbuster had 2 proton streams instead of just one, the animation time required for every single ghost-busting scene would essentially be doubled, which would have been impossible to complete within their deadline. Bruno suggested changing the design to a single handheld thrower for each Ghostbuster, which would cut the visual effects work in half and make the deadline more manageable. His only specific request for the new design was that the tip of the wand needed to have lights built into it so the visual effects team would have something bright to help them synchronize the animated proton streams to the live-action footage when they composited everything together in post-production. Fact 6. Proton Pack never said in first film. Despite the fact that everyone knows these iconic backpacks as Proton Packs, that exact term is never actually spoken out loud anywhere in the original 1984 Ghostbusters movie, which is something that surprises most fans when they find out about it. Throughout the entire film, the characters refer to their ghost-catching equipment using various other technical-sounding names, but the specific phrase Proton Pack simply doesn't appear in the dialogue at all, even though it became the universally recognized name for the device among fans and in all the merchandising that followed. When Peter Venkman talks about the equipment in the movie, he calls it an unlicensed nuclear accelerator during the elevator scene at the Sedgwick Hotel, and later on he refers to it as a positron collider when he's talking to Slimer after their first successful capture. The script and the characters clearly knew what these devices were supposed to be and how they functioned, but for whatever reason, nobody in the original film ever uses the straightforward term Proton Pack that would become so famous later on. The term Proton Pack finally makes its official on-screen debut in Ghostbusters 2, which came out 5 years later in 1989. In that sequel, Egon Spengler is the first character to actually say the words Proton Pack during the subway tunnel scene when he tells the team they need to get their equipment ready. There's also a moment when the doorman at the mayor's mansion asks the Ghostbusters if he can buy a proton pack for his little brother, and Egon responds by telling him that a proton pack is not a toy, which gives the device its proper name in dialogue for the very first time in the movie series. Fact 7, made with vintage 1960s electronic parts. The hero proton packs that appear in close-up shots throughout the movie were assembled using a collection of vintage electronic components and hardware from the 1960s, including surplus resistors, pneumatic fittings, various hoses, and ribbon cable that the prop builders scavenged from different sources to give the packs their detailed, industrial look. These weren't modern parts that were made to look old or vintage-style replicas created specifically for the movie, but rather actual leftover components from 20 years earlier that happened to have exactly the right aesthetic that the production team was looking for when they were building these supposed high-tech ghost-catching devices. The prop department chose these vintage 1960s parts because they had a chunky, analog appearance that fit perfectly with the idea that the Ghostbusters had built their equipment using whatever they could get their hands on. And the old resistors and pneumatic fittings gave the packs a cobbled-together, homemade quality that made them feel more believable as something a couple of scientists might actually construct in their spare time. Beyond just looking right for the story, these specific vintage parts also had substantial physical weight and presence on camera, which helped sell the idea that the packs were serious pieces of machinery rather than lightweight props. What makes this detail particularly interesting for modern fans is that these exact same vintage parts from the 1960s have become nearly impossible to find today, which has created major challenges for replica builders who want to create accurate reproductions of the original hero packs. Many of these components went out of production decades ago, and even when someone manages to track down the correct vintage parts, they often cost hundreds of dollars because they've become so rare and sought after by collectors and prop enthusiasts who understand their historical significance to the film. Fact 8, featured on Omni Magazine cover. In the movie, after the Ghostbusters successfully capture their first ghost at the Sedgwick Hotel, they become overnight celebrities with their faces and equipment plastered all over the news media, and one of the magazines that features them is Omni, a real science and science fiction publication that actually existed in the 1980s. The October 1984 issue of Omni Magazine shows a Proton Pack on its cover with the tagline, "Quantum Leaps, Ghostbusters Tools of the Trade." And what makes this particular magazine cover fascinating is that it features one of the actual hero props in absolutely pristine condition, looking cleaner and more polished than the packs ever appeared during the rest of the film. The pack that was photographed for the Omni Magazine cover was most likely shot very early in the production process, possibly even before the main filming began, which explains why it looks so perfect and unmarked compared to how beat up and weathered the packs become as the movie goes on. Prop experts who have studied the cover photo believe this might have been the very first piece of film or photography that featured. The pack, after it was initially built, captured at a moment when all the paint was fresh, all the details were intact, and nothing had been damaged or worn down from being handled by actors during 14-hour shooting days. This magazine cover became an important reference point for fans and replica builders over the years because it shows the Proton Pack in its original, untouched state, before any of the wear and tear from filming affected its appearance. The cover even shows up again in later Ghostbusters movies, including a scene in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, where copies of this same October 1984 Omni issue can be spotted on the floor of the firehouse attic, serving as a nice callback to this piece of in-universe media coverage. Fact 9. Built by Star Wars Effects. Master. For years, people assumed that the hero Proton Packs were built by the regular prop department at Columbia Pictures, but information that came out during a prop auction in July of 2012 revealed that the packs were actually constructed by Boss Film Studios, which was a visual effects company founded by Richard Edlund, one of the most legendary effects artists in Hollywood history. Edlund was a founding member of Industrial Light and Magic, where he worked on the original Star Wars trilogy and won Academy Awards for his groundbreaking visual effects work on both Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark. So by the time he started his own company and took on Ghostbusters, he was already considered one of the top effects masters in the entire film industry. Edlund left Industrial Light and Magic in 1983, right after finishing work on Return of the Jedi, and he immediately set up Boss Film Studios with financial backing from Columbia Pictures and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, who both needed a visual effects house and were willing to invest $5 million to help him get his new company off the ground. Ghostbusters became one of the very first projects that Boss Film Studios worked on, and the company took on dual responsibilities for the film, handling not just the visual effects for the proton streams and ghost animations, but also building the actual physical props that the actors would wear and use during filming. The fact that someone with Edlund's background and expertise was involved in creating the Proton Packs helps explain why they had such advanced electronics for their time, with sophisticated lighting systems that included 15 blue scrolling lights in the power cell and 4 red rotating lights in the cyclotron, plus all the elaborate light features built into the wands that would help the effects team synchronize the animated streams in post-production. Fact 10. One legendary pack lost forever. One of the most important Proton Pack props from Ghostbusters 2 has been lost forever in what might be the most heartbreaking story in the prop collecting community, as a semi-hero pack that fans nicknamed Number 4 vanished, without a trace during its owner's international move in 2005. This particular pack was sold at a Profiles in History auction back in September of 2004, where it was purchased by a prop enthusiast and replica builder named Ken Hugel, who paid cash plus a high-quality replica pack made by Sean Bishop to acquire this piece of movie history from the original auction winner, though the person who sold it to him kept the certificate of authenticity for themselves. What made Number 4 so valuable to the prop building community wasn't just that it was a screen-used piece from the actual movie, but rather what Hugel and Bishop did with it after the purchase. The two men carefully took the pack apart piece by piece and documented every single measurement, detail, and construction technique they could find, creating what became an invaluable reference guide that prop builders still use today when they're trying to create accurate replicas. Their examination revealed a lot about the rushed and somewhat sloppy techniques that were used to build these mid-grade packs for Ghostbusters 2, showing evidence of hasty casting work and quick assembly methods that were necessary to meet the film's tight production schedule. Unfortunately, all of that research and documentation couldn't save the actual prop itself from being lost when Hugel moved to Romania in 2005. During the move, number 4 disappeared completely and has never been recovered, which means one of the few remaining semi-hero packs from Ghostbusters 2 is gone forever, along with any additional insights that future technology or examination methods might have revealed about its construction. Fact 11. Actors demanded lighter versions for sequel. The cast's constant complaints about how heavy and uncomfortable the original Proton Packs were to wear during the first movie led the prop department to create an entirely new type of pack for Ghostbusters 2, which they called mid-grade packs that were specifically designed to be lighter and easier to work with during filming. These new mid-grade versions weighed only around 28 pounds, which was a significant reduction from the 40-pound hero packs that the actors had been forced to wear during the original film. And the weight savings came from some clever design changes that simplified the construction without making the packs look noticeably different on camera. The prop builders achieved this weight reduction by taking one of the original packs and using it as a template to create a new mold. But instead of building the packs the same way they had done before, with separate fittings and components that were individually attached, they cast many of the details directly into the mold itself as part of the main shell. This meant that pieces like certain tubes, fittings, and decorative elements that used to be made from metal or other materials and then bolted or glued onto the pack were now just molded as part of the fiberglass body, which saved weight and also made the packs faster and cheaper to produce. Beyond just casting the details into the mold, the prop department also cut down dramatically on the electronics and internal mechanisms that had made the original packs so heavy, stripping out components that weren't absolutely necessary for the filming requirements. The result was a pack that looked very similar to the originals when viewed from a distance or in regular filming conditions, but was much more comfortable for the actors to wear throughout long shooting days, though these lighter packs couldn't light up the way the original hero packs could. Fact 12. Harold Ramis Pack. Sold for $130,000, a screen-used hero Proton Pack that was worn by Harold Ramis during the filming of Ghostbusters sold at a Profiles in History auction for an absolutely staggering $130,000, which puts it among the most expensive movie props ever sold and demonstrates just how valuable these pieces of film history have become to collectors. This particular pack, which fans and collectors refer to as the Harold Pack because of its connection to Ramis and his character Egon Spengler, showed clear evidence of modifications that were made when the prop department adapted the original Ghostbusters packs for use in Ghostbusters 2, making it an important piece that documented how the equipment evolved between the two films. The Harold Pack was in rough condition when it went up for auction, showing significant damage and missing several important parts that had either broken off or been removed over the years since filming wrapped. Most notably, the pack was missing its crank knob, which is one of the distinctive features on the side of the cyclotron. And it also had a broken component called the N filter that had been damaged at some point during its life. Despite these condition issues and the fact that nobody knew whether the electronics inside the pack were still functional after all those years, collectors were still willing to pay an enormous amount of money just to own a piece of equipment that had actually been worn by one of the original Ghostbusters. The same auction that sold the Harold Pack also featured the ghost trap and pedal that was used in the hotel ballroom scene when the team captures Slimer for the first time, and that piece of equipment sold for $60,000, which shows that there's a huge market for authentic Ghostbusters props among serious collectors who are willing to spend fortunes to own these iconic pieces of movie history. Fact 13. Stunt packs were foam rubber fakes. In addition to the heavy hero packs that were used for close-up shots and scenes where the equipment needed to light up, the prop department also created lightweight foam rubber versions that were made from the exact same mold but were essentially hollow shells with no electronics or heavy components inside whatsoever. These stunt packs were specifically designed to be used whenever the actors needed to take falls, get knocked around, or perform any kind of physical action that might damage an expensive hero pack or potentially hurt someone because of all that weight. And they were light enough that the actors could move around much more freely without worrying about the burden of carrying 40 pounds on their backs. The foam rubber stunt packs looked identical to the hero versions when filmed from a distance or in quick action shots, which was exactly the point since the audience wasn't supposed to notice when the production switched between different types of props depending on what the scene required. Because they came from the same mold as the hero packs, all the surface details and shapes were exactly right, but instead of being made from heavy fiberglass shells with aluminum backplates and all the electronic components inside, these stunt versions were just lightweight foam that had been painted to match the appearance of the real equipment. Harold Ramis mentioned in interviews that the production used different versions of the packs throughout filming depending on what each particular scene needed, and the stunt packs were part of that system along with the batteryless versions that were lighter than the full hero packs but heavier than the foam rubber ones. The prop department had to keep track of which type of pack was needed for each shot, making sure the actors had the lightweight foam versions whenever there was any chance of them getting damaged or causing injury during physical stunts. Fact 14. Wand barrel extension was an afterthought. One of the most recognizable features of the Neutrona wand is the green lever on the side that the Ghostbusters pull to extend the barrel before they fire at ghosts. But this mechanism wasn't actually part of Stephen Dane's original design for the weapon and was instead added as an afterthought once the wand had already been completely built. The prop builders apparently decided they needed some kind of extending barrel feature after Dane had finished his design work, which meant they had to find a place to put the activation lever on a wand that hadn't been designed to accommodate it in the first place. The result of this last-minute addition is that the green lever ended up in what many prop experts and replica builders consider to be an oddly awkward position, just sticking out from the side of the wand in a spot where your thumb can reach it, but where it doesn't really integrate smoothly with the rest of the design. When you look at the original concept drawings that Dane created, there's no green lever anywhere on them, which confirms that this feature was definitely something that got crammed in after the basic wand design was already finalized and approved. This kind of on-the-fly modification was apparently pretty common during the rushed production schedule for Ghostbusters, as the prop department was constantly making changes and additions to accommodate new ideas or requirements that came up during filming. The fact that such an iconic feature of the Neutrona wand was essentially an improvised addition rather than part of the planned design shows how much of the movie's most memorable equipment came together through a combination of careful planning and quick problem solving, with the prop builders having to adapt and modify their work constantly to meet the needs of the production as it moved forward. Fact 15. Electronics advanced for 1984. Technology. The Hero Proton Packs featured electronics that were remarkably sophisticated and advanced for 1984, especially when you consider that this was years before the kind of programmable LED systems and microcontrollers that modern prop builders take for granted were widely available to filmmakers. The packs had 15 individual blue lights arranged in the power cell that would scroll in sequence to create an animated effect, plus 4 red lights built into the circular cyclotron at the bottom of the pack that would rotate in a pattern. And all of these lighting effects had to be created using the analog electronic components and circuits that were available at the time. The Neutrona wands were even more complex from an electronic standpoint, as they featured multiple types of lighting systems, all working together in a single handheld prop that the actors had to carry and operate during filming. The most elaborate versions of the wands had fluorescent bar graph displays that would light up to show the power level, regular incandescent bulbs for various indicator lights, and strobing flash mechanisms built into the barrel tip that would sync with the visual effects team's work in post-production to help them line up the animated proton streams with the live-action footage. Building all of these electronic features into props that also had to be durable enough to survive weeks of filming, light enough that actors could carry them for hours at a time, and reliable enough that they wouldn't break down in the middle of important scenes was a significant technical challenge. The fact that Richard Edlund and his team at Boss Film Studios managed to create working electronics that could do all of this using 1980s technology is part of what makes these props so impressive from an engineering standpoint, and it helps explain why modern replica builders still study the original packs to understand how they achieved such sophisticated effects with the limited tools and components they had available.